Welcome back to Study Hall, the place where we like to dig into those really thought-provoking topics. Today, it's a new executive order.
Yeah, this executive order, it's on the U.S. approach to international environmental agreements.
Quite a mouthful.
It is. It's definitely one of those that makes you stop and think, what's going on here?
It does. You know, at its core, it really highlights this inherent tension between, well, looking out for our own national economic interests and then, also shouldering that global responsibility when it comes to the environment. It's a tough one.
Yeah, it really is. So let's set the stage. It's January 20th, 2025. And this executive order, well, it's all about putting America first, right? At least when it comes to these global environmental issues.
Exactly.
And we've got the executive order itself, but we also have this in-depth analysis that kind of outlines the potential pluses and minuses.
Yeah, it's good to have both sides.
It is. So think of us as your study buddies.
That's right. We're diving into this dense material, so you don't have to.
That's what we're here for.
And hopefully by the end of this, you'll walk away with, a clear understanding of what this shift could actually mean, both for the U.S. and the world.
Big picture stuff. To really grasp it, though, we need to take a step back. Remember the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, of course.
Almost 200 countries came together. I mean, it was a landmark moment for climate action, pledging to, reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. Well, this executive order, it calls for the U.S. to withdraw.
Okay, backing out of the Paris Agreement. That's significant.
It is.
So what else is in this executive order?
Well, it also calls for the U.S. to halt all its financial commitments to those international climate funds. And it also fundamentally reshapes how the U.S. approaches any kind of international energy agreement. It's a pretty big change in direction.
So let me get this straight. The main point of this executive order is that it puts U.S. economic interests above everything else.
I think that's fair to say.
Okay.
So it's pretty explicit. The order states that any international agreement the U.S. enters into, it can't, and I quote here, unduly or unfairly burden the United States, protecting American jobs, industries, economic growth. That's the priority here.
Okay, so can you give me like a concrete example of what that might look like in practice?
Sure. Imagine a scenario where adhering to an international environmental agreement, it means that American industries, they have to adopt these costly new technologies.
Right.
And that leads to job losses.
Oh, I see.
This executive order, well, it suggests that that kind of agreement would be, harmful to U.S. economic interests. So the U.S. would, well, either withdraw from it or refuse to participate in the first place. The Paris Agreement, that's the most obvious example.
Right.
But it extends to any agreement, really, that falls under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And here's a big one. It calls for an end to funding for international climate funds.
Whoa. Pulling funding from climate funds. That's massive.
It is.
So what's the thinking there?
Well, take the Green Climate Fund, for example. It was established to help those developing nations make the switch to cleaner energy.
Right.
And adapt to the impacts of climate change. The U.S. has been a major contributor to this fund, and pulling out, well, it could have a domino effect on those nations' efforts to combat climate change.
So less financial aid for developing nations when it comes to combating climate change. What else?
Okay, so the executive order also dictates a new direction for how the U.S. handles these international energy agreements. From now on, the focus is going to be on economic efficiency, American prosperity, consumer choice, and fiscal restraint. Things like that.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the overall picture here. It sounds like environmental considerations are kind of taking a backseat.
You could definitely interpret it that way. Now, the order itself, it does offer some justification for this shift. It claims that the U.S., well, it already has a proven track record of achieving both economic and environmental goals, through sensible policies.
And they specifically call out policies that don't, and I'm quoting here, encumber private sector activity. So that sounds like they're really favoring those market-driven solutions over any kind of government regulation.
Right, but remember, we also have that analysis document.
Right.
It really digs into the potential pros and cons, which is pretty fascinating.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are some of the key arguments in favor of this executive order?
Well, the analysis lays out several. First, it it really emphasizes this economic prioritization, which, as we've discussed, that's the cornerstone of this whole order.
Right.
The argument is that protecting American jobs, American industries, that's paramount. The analysis even suggests that participating in certain international agreements, well, it could actually put American businesses at a disadvantage, leading to job losses, right? And hindering economic growth.
I see. So it's tapping into that us versus them kind of mentality.
Is.
Right? Where global cooperation, it sometimes comes at the expense of our own domestic interests, like a protect our own sentiment.
Yeah, it's complex.
Yeah.
I mean, there are valid arguments on both sides. It's really about striking that balance between finding global solutions for these global challenges we're facing,
Right.
and then also safeguarding the economic well-being of our own citizens.
Right, because I mean, global challenges do require global solutions.
They do.
But at the same time, you have to think about what's best for your own people.
Absolutely.
What other potential benefits are highlighted in the analysis?
Well, financial savings.
Okay.
Ceasing financial contributions to those international climate funds, well, it would free up, taxpayer dollars. The argument is that those funds could then be redirected to address those domestic priorities.
Okay, yeah. I mean, on the surface, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also makes me wonder, what are the potential consequences of pulling back that funding?
Yeah.
What impact does that have on global efforts to deal with climate change?
It's a good point.
What happens to those initiatives that we're relying on that funding?
You're right. It's not just about the money.
Right.
It's about the ripple effect.
Yeah.
So the analysis also points to sovereignty and decision making as a potential positive outcome. The idea being that withdrawing from agreements that are seen as misaligned with U.S. interests, well, it allows for greater control over domestic policy.
So more autonomy, charting our own course based on what's perceived as best for the U.S., even if it means kind of going against the international consensus.
Yeah. It reflects a shift in how the U.S. views, its place in the world.
Interesting.
The analysis also highlights the promotion of efficiency as a potential benefit.
Okay. What do they mean by that?
Well, executive order, it calls for prioritizing economic efficiency and fiscal restraint in all those energy agreements. It stresses the importance of focusing on policies that yield, measurable benefits to the American economy. So less red tape, fewer bureaucratic hurdles, and more emphasis on those tangible outcomes that directly benefit American citizens.
So streamlining processes, prioritizing actions that have clear economic benefits for Americans.
Got it.
Are there any other potential benefits that they highlight in this analysis?
Yeah, one more. The analysis suggests that this whole shift, it could actually encourage innovation. By easing regulations and relying more on the private sector to spearhead environmental progress. The argument is that we could actually see this surge in creativity and technological advancement. It's a necessity breeds innovation kind of argument.
So the thinking is that by challenging companies to come up with their own solutions, they'll be more likely to find those truly groundbreaking ideas because the onus is on them to find solutions.
Right. Now, it's important to remember these are all potential benefits.
Right.
There's no guarantee that any of them will actually happen. It's important to understand the arguments, of course,
Yeah.
but it's also important to look at them with a critical eye.
Absolutely. And we need to weigh these potential benefits against the potential drawbacks. And speaking of drawbacks, I think it's time to flip the coin.
Yeah, let's do it.
And look at the other side of the argument. What are the potential downsides outlined in the analysis document? Stick with us, because we're just getting started.
We'll be right back. Okay, so let's dive into some of these potential drawbacks, right?
Okay.
Because every policy shift like this, there are always trade-offs, right? Things you have to consider.
Yeah.
This executive order, I mean, it's no different.
Right. For all the talk about those economic gains, there's some serious concerns on the other side.
Oh, absolutely. And the first one that really jumps out is the impact it could have on global leadership.
Okay.
The analysis warns that pulling out of these major agreements like the Paris Accord, it could really diminish the U.S.'s role as a global leader when it comes to climate action. It's like sending a signal that the U.S. is, stepping back from its commitment to tackling this issue. And it makes you wonder, what message does that send to our allies, and even more importantly, to those countries that are already feeling the effects of a changing climate?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
What message does it send when the U.S., historically such a big player in these international agreements, just decides to go its own way?
Right.
Does it damage trust?
Right.
Does it make it harder to cooperate in the future?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big concern. And it's not, it's not just about perception.
Right.
It could actually have real consequences when it comes to diplomatic relationships.
I see.
If the U.S. is seen as unreliable or unwilling to contribute to, finding these global solutions, well, it could hurt our standing in the world, and that could even impact things like trade agreements,
right,
or collaborations in other areas.
So there's a risk of jeopardizing existing relationships,
yeah,
and even making it tougher to collaborate in the future. What other potential drawbacks are they talking about?
Okay, well, the analysis also points to some potential environmental setbacks. It's a pretty straightforward argument. If the U.S. reduces its commitment to fighting climate change, well, it could slow down progress on those global environmental goals. Things like reducing greenhouse gases and mitigating the effects of climate change.
Right, and it's not just the U.S., right? The U.S. pulling out, it could have a ripple effect.
It could.
Right, it could encourage other nations to loosen their commitments too. And we're not just talking about, abstract goals here. We're talking about rising sea levels, extreme weather events, disruptions to ecosystems.
Right.
These are real issues that affect everyone, no matter where they live.
Absolutely. It really underscores the reality that climate change, it's a global problem that demands a global response. And speaking of global perception, the analysis also brings up concerns about damage to the U.S.'s reputation.
Okay, reputational damage. That's interesting.
Yeah.
How do they see that playing out?
Well, they suggest that this decision, it could be perceived as isolationist, and that could hurt the U.S.'s reputation among its allies and among, environmental advocates around the world. It mentions this concept of soft power, that ability to influence others, not through force, but through diplomacy and cooperation and shared values.
So by choosing to go it alone, the U.S. risks kind of undermining its ability to influence global decisions and shapes those international norms. And that weakens its soft power.
Exactly.
It makes me think of the Kyoto Protocol. That was another time when the U.S. had to make these tough choices.
Yeah.
About balancing economic interests with global responsibility.
Right.
Understanding how those past decisions played out, I think it could be really helpful, for understanding how this might play out.
Yeah. I mean, history does tend to repeat itself, right?
Right.
So what else is in this analysis? Well, it also talks about missed opportunities for collaboration.
Right.
The analysis points out that participating in these global agreements, it allows for, sharing knowledge, solving problems together. And those benefits might be lost if the U.S. just walks away. It's like, imagine you're in a brainstorming session, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's working together, trying to find solutions.
Right.
And then you just get up and leave. You miss out on those insights and those innovations that could benefit everyone involved.
Right, because when you isolate yourself, you limit your access to those different perspectives and those potential solutions. And when it comes to something as complex as climate change, you need all the help you can get.
Exactly. Global challenges demand global collaboration. No one country has all the answers. And working together, it lets us pool resources, share expertise, and learn from each other's experiences. We see this all the time. Scientific breakthroughs, technological advancements, they often come from collaboration.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected, and working together can actually make our efforts much stronger.
Right. So what else? One of the last points the analysis raises is the long-term costs, the potential long-term economic costs of not doing anything about climate change.
Okay.
It acknowledges that, the executive order wants to reduce those immediate financial obligations.
Yeah.
But the potential costs of just ignoring the problem, things like disaster recovery, healthcare costs related to climate change, disruptions to economic sectors, those costs could be way bigger than any short-term savings.
Just like that saying, pay now or pay later.
It is.
If you ignore a problem, it doesn't just go away. It just gets worse.
Right.
And it becomes more expensive to fix down the road.
Yeah.
And those costs, they're not just financial, right?
No.
They're social. They're environmental.
Exactly. Think about the potential for people having to relocate because of rising sea levels, increased health risks from extreme heat and air pollution,
Yeah.
the damage to ecosystems that support industries, like agriculture and fishing. These are costs that are really hard to measure,
Yeah.
but they're real.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
So it seems like, we're looking at this balancing act.
Right.
On one hand, we want to prioritize the economy, protect jobs. But on the other hand, there's all these concerns about what could happen if we pull back from these global efforts.
Right. It's a classic dilemma.
Yeah.
Policymakers face this all the time.
Yeah.
That tension between national interests and global responsibilities.
Yeah.
And this executive order, it really puts a spotlight on it.
It does. And it raises some important questions for all of us to think about.
Yeah.
What do we prioritize as a nation? What trade-offs are we willing to make? How do we balance our own choices with our responsibilities to the rest of the world?
Those are the questions, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're questions that require, careful thought and open discussion.
Well, it definitely seems like we've unpacked a lot. What are your final thoughts on this? What should our listeners be thinking about as we move forward?
Yeah, it's about those really big questions, isn't it?
It is.
What do we value as a nation? What are we willing to, to give up? And how do those choices line up with what we owe to the rest of the world? It's complicated. There's no easy answers.
No, it's definitely not a simple yes or no situation. This executive order, it almost feels like one chapter in a much, much longer story.
Exactly. And remember, there are so many different perspectives on this, both here in the U.S. and around the world. It's really important to understand all those different viewpoints.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit, try to see the bigger picture. What are some of those key perspectives that are shaping this debate?
Well, on one side, you have folks who strongly believe that the U.S., we should just focus on our own economic interests, above everything else.
Yeah.
Their argument is that these international agreements, they can be really costly, and burdensome. And they often don't benefit American workers and businesses. They might even point to specific industries or sectors that have been hurt by following these global environmental regulations.
So from that point of view, this executive order, it's like a course correction.
Yeah.
Right? It's a way to protect American jobs and make sure we can compete in the global economy. I imagine that this perspective also often goes hand in hand with a belief in limited government and free market solutions, that the private sector, they're the ones who can really drive innovation and economic growth.
Exactly. Now, on the other side, you have people who argue that the U.S., we have this moral obligation to lead on climate change and these other big environmental problems. They believe that we have a responsibility to protect the planet for future generations, and that we shouldn't let short-term economic gains overshadow long-term sustainability.
They might point to the urgency of climate action, right?
Yeah.
And the latest scientific data, or the fact that we're seeing more and more extreme weather.
Right. And that perspective probably really emphasizes how interconnected the world is.
Right.
That we're all in this together, and that these global challenges, well, they need global solutions. It's not about us versus them. It's about sharing that responsibility for the health of the planet.
That's it. And this view often acknowledges that climate change, it doesn't affect everyone equally.
Right.
Those who don't have the resources to adapt, they're the ones who suffer the most.
So we've got these two different worldviews, each one shaping how people see this executive order. And of course, it's not, it's not as simple as two opposing sides. There's a lot of nuance in between. Oh, absolutely. It's important to realize that these different viewpoints, they often come from, from deep-seated values and beliefs. It's not just about, looking at the numbers and the economic impact. It's about how we see our role in the world and our responsibilities to each other and to future generations.
It's about what matters most to us, what we're willing to give up, and what kind of future we want. Big questions. But they're questions that I think we need to be asking ourselves. So what happens next? Where do we go from here?
That is the question, isn't it? How this will all play out, how it'll affect those future international agreements and our efforts to address climate change. I mean, nobody knows for sure, but it's definitely something we need to pay attention to. We're at a crossroads, and the choices we make in these next few years, well, they're going to have a big impact.
It's a good reminder that we all have a part to play, whether it's having these tough conversations or pushing for policies that match our values or just making choices in our own lives to lessen our impact on the environment.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. Keep asking those questions, stay curious, and keep looking for those different viewpoints. The more informed we are, the better we'll be able to handle these challenges.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll keep exploring, keep learning, and keep talking about these important issues. Until next time.